And welcome to The Writer's Journey, Developing a Producer's Mindset. This is Brandon Easton. I am one of the 2015 Disney ABC Writing Program winners, which led to me getting work on Marvel's Agent Carter. Since then, I've worked on a variety of projects, including Judge Dredd False Witness, Star Trek Year 5, as well as the upcoming Transformers War for Cybertron Siege, which is now being delayed on Netflix. I am also the first African-American writer in history of Judge Dredd. And recently it has been announced that I worked on a deal with a Chinese production company. I am the first Western screenwriter in history to have a screenplay written for the domestic Chinese market pass through their censorship board. So it's been an amazing series of events that all happened because I had to change my mentality about the business. And with that being said, I'd like to introduce my incredibly talented and illustrious comrades here. We have Geoffrey Thorne, Ramón Govea, Shannon Denton, and Brandon Thomas. And with that being said, I will hand it off to Jeff to introduce himself, and the rest of you can go right after that, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of this panel. So Jeff?
Okay, real quick, I'm Geoff Thorne. Most recently, I was the showrunner for the Avengers Black Panther's Quest for Marvel Animation. Prior to that, I was a producer on The Librarians for TNT, a writer-producer on that. I created Mosaic for Marvel Comics. Y'all didn't buy it. You need to go out and buy those trade paperbacks so we can get back on that story. And a bunch of other stuff. I did Knight Rider for Lion Forge Entertainment, which all of us have in common. We all worked at some point for Lion Forge. And I was an actor for 5 minutes before that, wrote a bunch of books. Y'all know me. Oh, and I'm a co-EP on Power, Book 2, Ghost.
Oh, you left that out.
Yeah, the biggest, most recent. What the hell? Anyway.
Ramón.
So I'm Ramón Govea. Been in the business for a little over 10 years now. Basically started off producing live action. So I was producing a lot of short form content commercials back in around 2010 to 2014 for brands like Machinima, Stan Lee's World of Heroes. And then I pivoted over to comic books and video games. I was writing all the copy for The Walking Dead Road to Survival for all their marketing. And ended up selling a series to Lion Forge, Incidentals, for their Catalyst Prime universe. And then most recently, I pivoted from there, and I was working for NBA All-Star Baron Davis, where I was his chief content officer. So basically, we were developing IP, preparing all the merchandise, apparel, and then getting that ready for distribution for a couple different brands, producing animations as well, for the Black Santa brand primarily. So that's kind of my history, and now I'm the founder of Myth Division, where we're basically a comic book imprint, and we're focused heavily on funding through Kickstarter.
Shannon.
Hey, everybody. I'm Shannon Denton. Previously been a writer on Transformers, Ben 10, Justice League, Spider-Man, Avengers. And as a producer, was on Nathan Fillion and Alan Tudyk's Con Man series that aired on Sci-Fi. And I'm currently directing an unannounced show at Hulu. That's my background.
Sweet. All right. Well, I'm Brandon Thomas, comic book writer since 2003. My most current work that I hope most of you are familiar with is Excellence, which is coming out through the Skybound Entertainment imprint at Image Comics. Done a couple of projects at Skybound, Hardcore, previously Horizon, and then I have a bunch of unannounced stuff that is even more unannounced in the wake of the pandemic. But Excellence is out there, and I got more cool stuff coming. I have a new series that's debuting through Aftershock now in October called Sympathy with No Devils, which is a cool kind of like Roger Rabbit meets Devil in a Blue Dress noir tale with dead Godzilla and all sorts of cool.
Just a week's vacation in your head, man. Just a 1 week. Okay.
So that's me. I'm out here and got a lot of stuff coming, and I appreciate the support all these years since I've been doing this.
Excellent. So as you can see, I've tried to gather a bunch of folks from a series of different disciplines, but also have worked in multiple mediums for the sake of getting our audience to understand what needs to be done as a creator, particularly as a creator who may have had a rough patch here and there, to move from asking for work to developing your own work that people want from you. So a couple of things I want to say. Now, this panel is not necessarily for the novice writer, because me and Geoff Thorne started the Writer's Journey panels over 10 years ago at what will originally was Kamikaze, what became Stan Lee's Comic-Con. Now it's called LA Comic-Con. And I'd say 85% of our panels dealt with what to do, you know, breaking in. And Ramon and Brandon Thomas specifically also have been on those panels over the years. So we're moving way past the novice side, and we're going more toward mid-career or folks who had a certain level of success, but may have had a bump or inevitably reached that point where no matter how good you are in the beginning, there's a point when you run into a cold patch. And the way almost everybody I've seen who has hit a cold patch has had to change their career for their own favor and take matters into their own hands. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to get into the different ways you can approach the marketplace. You don't have to go to anybody with your hands out, with your hat in hand, as, I don't mean to use this term, but as a beggar in a sense. Like we're going to talk about all the emotional and psychological changes you have to make to go from hat in hand to being like, yo, this is what I have to show. Do you want it or not? Because other people might. So we're going to talk about that. So the first question I have is, what was the moment, or was there a series of situations that made you realize it was time to start taking control of your own career by creating your own material? In other words, at what point did you stop asking people for opportunities to start creating them? Like what was the catalyst for that?
Well, there are probably more than one. I think things tend to stack up. Like you get to like a critical mass, or damn it, I gotta take the wheel, because you know you don't just jump. Well, maybe some people do, but for me, I didn't just jump one and go, oh, I'm in charge now. You know, it was more like, okay, I'll be a little more in charge of this. Let's try that. I'll be a little more in charge. Let me see who I can put together for this. You know, and then at some point you realize that with all those working parts, people kept still saying no a lot, because you still were giving them the opportunity to say no, because there's always some one person, usually the person with the money, that you still end up having to go to no matter how good your team is. All you've really done is assembled a team of people just like you, immensely talented, but you still ain't got no cash. So the cash guy is still the person to say no to all of that. I had a really bad patch on a comic book that hasn't come out yet that I'm still wrestling to get the rights back for so I can do it. After that, I realized I have to do it myself. I have to own my own, what they call IP now. I have to own my own property. What money I have, I need to devote to that property. The market was not such that you could sort of roll up on a Dark Horse or an Image or whatever. It was much more sort of cronyistic and less of a free-for-all, bring me a hot property.
Can you speak up a little bit more?
I'm sorry, and less of a free-for-all where you bring me a hot property. So I found an artist that I couldn't afford, Todd Harris, who drew this picture that's behind me. And he found a writer he couldn't afford, me. And we basically split down the middle. We said, we'll make 10 properties together. We'll each own half of it. No one gets paid. We do all the work. And then we'll bring essentially a close to finished product to market. And then anybody who is interested in that will be just publishing a book. They won't even have to do any editorial. We basically did all the work. We front-loaded it so completely. And it worked. People wanted to publish that book, and people in my other business decided they wanted to hire me now because they read the book. It wasn't designed to be that, but it worked as a great calling card for my writing as well in a completely other industry than comics. And it sort of said, okay, this is how you need to do it. Right? Like, that was my story. I think it's probably different for everyone slightly, but there's some version of that where it's like, I guess I got to take the wheel.
Mm-hmm. Who else?
All right. Well, for me, my moment came. I had a brief stint working with Marvel Comics. I did like an 11-page Spider-Man story. I did a couple of Fantastic Four books for their kids line. I scripted a Shatterstar miniseries with Rob Liefeld and Marat Michaels. And I had this pitch. It was an Invisible Woman pitch that I had in at Marvel, kind of making the rounds, also for the kids line. And I had an editor who I believed at the time, was a great ally to me on the inside of the company. And we had this pitch we were really excited about. She took it up the ladder, and it died in some room. And so after that, they came to me, she came to me and said, oh, the pitch didn't go forward. I was really disappointed because we both respectively seemed really excited about the pitch. And the longer after that experience, a kind of little bitterness and resentment started to foster within me. And then me and my editor had a confrontation, not a confrontation, an email confrontation, where she essentially told me that, according to Marvel at that time, my writing was decent and serviceable, which, while that was more than enough for a lot of other people there, because I was a Black writer, my standard, was higher than everyone else. And that essentially I wasn't meeting that standard at that point. And I was, at the time, obviously we all know that that's true. So this is not like a shocking plot twist, but the fact that it was being kind of given to me by someone that I thought was my, ally, within the building, and the fact that it was said in such like a casual way, like it was okay to hold me to this higher, impossibly high standard that no one else was having to meet. And given the fact that I had done an 11-page story, I had done 4 stories for the kids line, 3 of them were like remixes of old stories, and that I scripted a previous series, the fact that they were acting like they had given me like a legitimate shot, or that they had given me some actual runway to kind of develop and really show myself as a storyteller, the fact that they were turning around now and using that as a justification not to give me more work was basically infuriating. And I won't say wasted, but I had spent a lot of time trying to break into Marvel Comics, several years, because I had a couple of patrons, I guess you would say, that kind of fronted me to editors. I'm like, if you're looking for, if you have projects that you don't need people that have a ton of experience, you should talk to Brandon. So I thought that I had kind of skipped over, I kind of skipped to the head of the line, but not really. So at that point, I decided that I needed to spend the majority of my time working on comics and properties that I owned and controlled. And out of that came the Many Adventures of Miranda Mercury, which was a title that Archaea published as an original graphic novel back in 2008. I think the first issue came out. Then the company went out of business. Then they came back, and we completed the story as an original graphic novel in 2011. And doing that Miranda Mercury project changed the trajectory of my entire career. That led to my lengthy Voltron stint at Dynamite. And so basically that project, going out on my own and putting my focus and my energy into something that I owned and controlled, changed the course of my entire career. And it showed me that that's what I should have been doing from the beginning, instead of trying to break into, Marvel Comics, bloodying my forehead, hitting it against the wall, even though I did have a little success at it. So that was my major turning point, when my career changed from, I want to write like a lengthy, I want to write Spider-Man for 5 or 6 years. I want to write Batman for 5 or 6 years. And from that, small experience, it was like, no, I just want to write my own stuff. And if that leads to opportunities elsewhere, that's great. But this is where I want to spend the majority of my time and my effort.
Awesome.
Ramon, you got I like listening on these. These are always you always learn more when you listen. But
no, I mean, for me, it's kind of been a more gradual process. A lot of it had to do with understanding that you have to do it yourself in order to build a resume that people are going to take seriously. So mastering the craft obviously was like my first area of focus when I got to LA and wanted to break into the industry as a writer. And I quickly learned that in order to get my own stuff written, I would have to make it myself. And at that time I was just focused on movies, right? And so I was like, man, I've got to put together the team and figure out how this works. And so that's what I did for the first few years. But in that process and working with a bunch of different collaborators, partners, investors, because somebody has to pay for it, I kind of learned that if you really want things to run smoothly, you kind of have to take control of the money, the financing, and the hiring. And so that's when I figured out, all right, if I don't commit to that, I'm never going to get to the point where I want to be, which is, being in control of a really large brand that has legs and where you have the budgets and the creative freedom to really do whatever you want. So that was really the kind of the process for me. It wasn't necessarily a moment, but I have these moments all the time where, very recently, I decided I don't want to produce any feature movies for a while. A few days later, I get hired for another gig, and that deal goes south because of negotiations. But it's just interesting that every time you want to walk away from something, if you're really meant to do it, you put it right back in,
They put it back in.
Yeah. I was going to say mine was fortunate and unfortunate. It was in my very first entry into the business. So I was, hired to work in TV. Super excited. It was my first time getting paid as a creator. And, as I'm walking in and they're showing me where my office is going to be, and I'm super excited, I see this older gentleman walking out with a box, but I was young enough at the time, I didn't know what the box meant and why there were two security guards walking him out.
Oh, man.
And so I go from like super elated to later finding out that the guy walking out that I am replacing is one of my childhood storytelling idols from comics. And so in my first week on the job, I learned that you have you are there as an asset to this company, and I will work super duper hard while I am, on the clock, but you don't own me after that, And so that was, it was kind of a two-parter, because then later in the year, I was working on a TV show and then coming home at night and drawing Deadpool for Marvel. And, it was like round the clock working on other people's stuff. And so I think that was sort of in year one, with what happened my first week on the job. And then a year later, being in this very fortunate situation where I was getting to work on all these things I had dreamed of from childhood, but then realizing I don't own a piece of any of this. I'm just grinding away, and I'm already working on the work for hire stuff during the day on the TV show of the same characters. So I just decided from that point on, everything that I did in the evening was going to be mine. Unless it was something that just came along like a Star Wars thing, just so I could check it off the box. Like,
Right.
There are those kinds of projects that roll around that you make an exception.
It's always the Star Wars exception.
Don't offer me an X-Men book. I'm just telling you right now. Don't offer me an X-Men book.
We've all got those, and those are legit. And those are okay.
Well, a few of us have said, we've come up with a few of us in this conversation. There's a common denominator, I should say, through this conversation, which is money. And I've been to a million of these type of panels, and no one talks about financing unless it's a panel is about financing, which is usually only one during the whole weekend at any big con. So my question is, outside of paying for your projects out of your own pocket, which is really what we have to do, what are your feelings on crowdfunding, and what advice do you have for folks in terms of how to attract investors? Or in other words, other than these ways, how do you find people who are willing to invest in you financially?
Well, speaking as an outsider, because I'm frankly don't have the balls to try crowdfunding yet. I keep getting right up to the line and going, no, I can't do it.
You gotta do it.
I know. But
you will.
I've watched almost all of my peers have done some version of it. And it works. I think it's changed the business model. You go right to the people that are directly going to be your audience. Theoretically, you can build a giant audience off of something that was a niche. That's not a guarantee. Obviously, if your product's crappy or it's the wrong timing or something, you know, it's just not the right moment for it, then no, you won't. But if it is the right moment, you put up something for $500, you end up coming back with $1 million. You know, that's not far-fetched, you know. So from that point of view, I think it's not only something people should consider, I think it's an absolutely like straight up legitimate line of financing, just like any other line of financing. In terms of financing my own projects, I'm that guy. I always had to wait until I had enough money in pocket to, still to this day, I always wait till I have enough money to just pay people so that, what do you call it? When you sign a contract with someone, they're working their ass off, right? It becomes more and more labor intensive depending on the job. I don't want anyone ever being able to look up and go, Jeff's checks bounced, Jeff's checks came in late, whatever, which means you got to wait because you have to build up enough cash to be able to do that. If you have the right set of friends, however, and then I'm going to step away and let the guys who actually do this crowdfunding stuff. If you have the right set of friends, you can make a co-ownership deal with a person whose skill set you can't afford to hire, like my friend Todd, or frankly, like me. He gets 50% ownership of something that maybe the idea was mine, but by the time it gets to, you know, in the hands of the public, the visuals all came from him. Maybe story points came from him. We literally share, which no money out of pocket, and you're trading sweat equity. His expertise plus my expertise equals something that can compete with the expertise of a team of players, so to speak. You have to be very sober about, are you that good? Todd and I went and looked at a lot of comic book shops, and we were like, okay, these guys can kick our butts. These guys are scrubs. Where do we sit in between? Because all of them were on the shelf. That was the thing. There was a whole bunch of work up there, and everybody was up there.
Good point.
Who can you beat? For sure. Who, if you throw down, you're an idiot. I don't care how much they paid you. You're about to get spanked. Yeah. There's that person. And then there's, you know, Warren Ellis or whoever. Maybe I'm that good, but can I beat him in a one-on-one? I don't know. So where does that place my book? Right? So you come out of that sober, and then you sit down to working, and you hope for the best. But in terms of actual going to get backers and things like that, I've been an absolute coward about that for 15 years. So I'm now going to step away and let the brave people talk.
Yeah, I guess just to piggyback on that point, I've had a lot of experience running campaigns, not just for myself, but for a bunch of clients. And to date, I didn't mention this earlier, but to date we've helped raise basically 1.2 million for various projects, right? Not just one project, but many.
Nice.
So it's definitely a process. There's science to it. It's heavily based in marketing, but what everything Jeff said is accurate. You know, there are some artists that I need to pay before we start the project, right? We don't wait for Kickstarter to do all the work. You have to do a lot before that. But then there are artists who, and there's only one artist to have this deal with, where just like Jeff, you know, his talents and my talents lend themselves to each other. So we've agreed to share 50% everything. And again, that's only one artist because there's very few people you can trust with that kind of responsibility. And so that's something that Jeff didn't mention, but I know he knows well.
Yeah, that's a fact.
That's who you choose to have a collaboration with or a partnership with. Is going to affect the likelihood of your success. So that goes for money too. If you're asking for money from someone else, you're going to be responsible for that money, you know, in terms of a return. And so it's not just like, hey, this is charity, go do your thing. And then if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You're highly accountable to delivering what you say you're going to deliver. So that's the most important thing to note about crowdfunding. But that being said, I mean, it's probably right now the best way to get a project funded in terms of comics, animation, film, anything like that. Because as long as you're committed to finishing it and you have the right team for it and they're professionals and they're on board and they're going to follow through, you can deliver an awesome product to your backers and build an audience because of it. I mean, I don't see a future where Kickstarter isn't going to really start spilling over into mainstream, and we're going to start seeing, you know, bigger companies jumping into Kickstarter, and Kickstarter imprints or companies start to, you know, break into the mainstream. So
yeah, we've already seen animation studios and other.
Yeah, LaShawn Thomas is a great example with Cannon Busters. I mean, there's so many. I mean, we've all seen them. A lot of us have backed them, but it's definitely a great resource or tool to build an audience and get your stuff made without having to pay for it.
It reminds me of, you know, funding your indie film back in the day.
Exactly right.
You had to go out and get backers to get your movie made.
Yeah.
I storyboarded a movie a long time ago, real low budget one, but I remember there was a whole, as I'm sitting there drawing away, there's a room full of guys on phones in the room next to me, just calling every single millionaire they could find in the United States, going, for a small donation, you could be a producer on this movie, you know, and that's been replaced by, you know, the crowdfunding sites.
Yeah, and social media too. I mean, to that point, it is a lot of, you know, the modern day version of phone calls. The key is now there's something called marketplace sophistication, where people are on the internet all the time now. So you don't want to spam people. That's one of the biggest mistakes. I'm sure all you guys know. Someone adds you on Facebook, and before they even say hi, they're like, "Will you back my Kickstarter?" You know, that is the wrong way to do this.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do
you
that.
know, it's something that you develop over time with your relationships. You start with your friends and family. You call the people you know. You message them, whatever. But it has to be authentic. It has to come from the heart. You can't be coming at it with it being a means to an end. You really need to engage your community and be doing it for your audience, your readers, with authenticity. But yeah, I mean, it's a great tool. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if it weren't for Kickstarter. So. Yeah, all the books behind me right here on the screen have been financed via Kickstarter, or the new one is going to be going on to Kickstarter later this summer. So,
do you prefer Kickstarter to Indiegogo, or do you use both?
I do, but there's a couple different pros and cons to both. Obviously, with Indiegogo, you get whatever you get. So if you don't meet your funding goal, you get to keep that money. But with Kickstarter, the reason why I like it is because there's almost this competitive spirit that comes along with it. So if you are able to set a goal where you know that even if you only get that much money, you can finance the rest, is what I usually recommend you do. Because you'll often overshoot, but the higher the goal you go for, the harder it is for you to build. You really need a ramp to lead up to it. But once you get that ramp and you have people excited and charged up for the campaign, you're all reaching towards a goal and you're working together to get that financing. And they know also there's that unspoken trust. Like because you're getting all of the money, you're going to deliver it with the best possible quality you need. If you're doing Indiegogo and you don't raise all the money, there's no guarantee you're even going to get halfway done with your
right. And I can skip away with that cash you sent me.
That's right. Or we have it in production, right, for 5, 6, 7 years.
Right.
So that's the downside to Indiegogo.
At my house that I just coincidentally built in Mount.
Exactly.
Real quick though, one of the things I really wanted to hit on, and I know that there are going to be people who are watching because obviously we can't answer audience questions right now. But one thing I've always been asked about Kickstarter specifically is, how do you move forward in Kickstarter if you don't already have a series of well-known credits? And one of the things I always say is there is a dual track to Kickstarter specifically. There are the folks, like everyone here has worked on some major IP in this particular panel, every one of us here, right? So in theory, it might be easier to pull in backers and donors based on your previous work with mainstream or well-known IPs. But then there are people who have no experience at all. Now, this is what I'm about to say is for those folks. So let's say you have an idea and you want to do a comic book specifically, or a graphic novel, or something visual. What you have to do, if you don't have an audience built in based on your previous work, is to, and this is a big Kickstarter trick that a secret I'm gonna give right now, but make sure that you have the money, or at least 50% of the money you're asking for. Because what's going to happen is, if you're starting out and you're not getting that traction, you have to basically seed your own project with money without letting people know it's you donating to yourself, to make it appear as if though people are donating. Because there's a psychological impact of, once you cross the goal, then suddenly you're legit. And then other people who may have been on the fence, once they see that you funded, in their mind, there's no longer a liability or a risk, because now you've got it, so you're going to get it.
Okay.
Well, it speaks to the mindset you were talking about, where you're no longer coming to people begging for a donation, right? You've reached your goal, and people see that. And so you're much more likely to get people to say, oh, I want to jump in on the successful train. Because even, you know, we talk about this a lot in our careers behind the scenes. There's periods where people think you're down or you're out and they don't call you and they don't talk to you, right? And then you pop up with a new project and they're like, hey, how's it going? You know, what you been up to? You know, are you guys hiring?
I've been up to this. I've been up to see this. I've been up to this. This is what I've been up to.
Yeah, right. No,
that's kind of the same mentality. Yeah.
And I would just say that ultimately, at the end of the day, and I really mean this, and this cuts across all of it, regardless of what your background is. Sometimes you just have to save the money up yourself.
Yep.
And a lot of folks, and I hate to say it this way, but a lot of people I meet all want shortcuts. They all want to be able to just like snap their fingers, and they tell some story about one person somewhere who raised $1.5 million. But guess what? That's that one person, and you don't know the real story behind that one person.
The reason those stories are news is because they're unusual.
Exactly.
They're lottery wins. Right. If it happened every time like that, nobody would know and nobody would care. Because
exactly.
I'll just plug in some money and get some money out. Like, but that's not how it works. Those things are very rare. So
and in other words, save up the money, take an extra job, and the old-fashioned term we always say is just hustle. Yeah. Figure out a way to make it happen. Brandon,
if you don't believe in yourself, it's the chances of you finding somebody else to have faith in you with no track record is, you know, it's pretty slim. So you got, at some point you have to really just sort of gamble on you. You know,
I feel like that never stops, honestly. Throughout your entire career, and I've seen you guys do it. You have to constantly gamble on yourself, even when there's situations where it's like, do I take this job or do I commit to this project that's going to bring me, you know, a different kind of a reward or success, you know, however you define it. So that's a good point.
Brandon, did you have some thoughts?
Oh, well, I haven't, I'm over here keeping secrets. I have not stepped into the Kickstarter space as of yet, but the operative word is yet. So I am also over here furiously writing notes down, even though, you know, I know a little bit of this stuff just because I've watched. I have a couple of friends that actually help people run campaigns. The campaigns that Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray have done for probably a decade now. I'm pretty close to the guy that helps them kind of run that. So I've been, you know, I kind of have like a laundry list of tips and stuff that I've been assembling for myself, and soon I will put them to use.
Nice.
All right.
I guess I'm last in line. I'm last in line.
You're gonna be fine, now, jump into another question real quick. And this is a classic one. We always get this at a lot of panels. But it's what were some of the unforeseen obstacles that you wish someone had warned you about in terms of stepping out on your own? Like, there are always these obstacles that pop up, whether financial or spiritual or emotional or psychological. What do you wish someone would have warned you about, let's say, you know, maybe a couple of years before you actually got into before you got to the point of wanting to produce your own material? Like, what are some cautionary tales or some cautionary tips that you have based on your own experience?
In terms of collaboration, I can say this is less my personal experience and more just observation of friends, and, you know, I had some good mentors, but being really honest with your partners that you're collaborating with. I've seen a lot of partnerships fall apart, not because either person, you know, dicked over the other person, but because there was a misunderstanding of what they were going to do with the success when it hit. And they had never talked it out. They didn't have a clear plan of how the partnership was going to work. Right. And I think that's so important. You know, you're going into it 50-50 sometimes, and you're thinking one thing and the other person's thinking another, and suddenly somebody's offering you money and you're wanting to take the money because you're like, money. And then your buddy is like, let's hold out for Spielberg as a director, Brad Pitt the star, and $30 million up front, you know?
That's ridiculous.
And but maybe your partner's right, but that's a conversation you should have had before you got to that point where then it falls apart because you didn't talk it through.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. Unforeseen, by definition, they're unforeseen. I mean, don't give your trust easily. Yeah. People have to prove that they are worth your trust. I would also say take your work as seriously as everyone else should take it. on the project behind me from Prodigal, that was 10 years ago almost. And we got nibbles from production companies and film companies right off the top, right as soon as the book came out. And when we would go have the meetings, they tried to play us like we were just these little kids who didn't know what we were doing.
And speak up a bit.
They tried to play us like we were just these little newbie guys who didn't know what we were doing. They wanted to make changes to the IP that would basically compromise the IP. It would basically be the same title, but kind of like doing a show about the Amish and making everybody black, like the opposite of that, right? And like, but did you read the material? Now, as Shannon is saying, though.
Sorry, I'm laughing right now because I think we're all executive producers on Jeff's new show, which I want to see.
Black Amish, let's go. No.
Black Amish this fall on.
No. But the point is what Shannon was saying is that Todd and I had talked all these things through already, like extensively. If this happens, then this. And they were making offers and talking about getting this actor and that director. And we're like, this is not a war movie. We did not sit down to make a war movie. I know y'all want to make a war movie. We'll be happy to make that war movie for you. If you'd like to hire us to do that, we will do that. You're not turning this into that. This was not made to be that. You have to be able to walk away.
Yeah.
You literally have to be, you have to be able to say no and mean it, right? And you can't come out of it going, oh, I wish I'd said yes. Can we run back in there and tell them we meant yes after all? You have to mean it, right? Because no one's going to love it as much as you. No one's going to treat it as decently as you plan to treat it. And it's a hard thing. If you're a hard ass like me, that's not a hard choice to make. I was lucky that Todd is also that same kind of gritty sort of person. But Shannon's right. You need to thrash out those sorts of details because in this world of what used to be called transmedia, your property can turn into a video game. It can turn into a bunch of toys. It can turn into a series of movies or books or a stage play in frickin' Malaysia. You don't know, right? So you have to have these details sort of at least loosely worked out.
Yeah.
Because the other guy's going to look for a weakness. They're going to look for any split between you and your partner, and there will be one because you're not the same person.
Yeah.
Right. There'll be something you disagree on, and they're going to look for that weakness and they're going to shove a wedge in it. Because if you guys break up, they still get the property, and then you're not friends anymore. And
yeah, Jeff's absolutely. I mean,
you know,
that goes along with what I was saying. I pulled a project once where it was a re-option, but my partner and I had already discussed. You know, we this wasn't the right place for it. You know, and we had to walk away from money, which is really painful. But it wasn't.
Especially when you're broke.
Yeah.
Especially when you're broke.
Very true.
It hurts. It hurts. But you have to, going back to like, you have to invest in yourself. You have to gamble on yourself. You have to believe in yourself. So,
yeah,
you know, if you do, then you've had those conversations with your partners, and it's a lot easier to make that walk together.
Ramon?
Yeah, I think for me, if I could hop in, the thing that I wish someone had told me is that, you know, I love kind of football metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
So usually when you're developing these projects and they kind of start from you and then you get together with another person and then it turns into something else completely different. I wish someone had warned me like how many kind of roles you have to assume sometimes when you're basically the, you know, kind of the top of the pyramid, you know. So carrying this football metaphor for, you know, the writer is not just, when you're working on your own project, you're not just the quarterback. You're also like the coach and the offensive coordinator and the GM and the cheerleader and the psychologist. And there are all these like roles that you have to wear sometimes that may kind of sneak up on you and you're not prepared for them if you're not prepared. Because it's easy to think that, you know, like, oh, I'm a writer, I just create things. I'll just, you know, hook up with an artist and then we'll get on Kickstarter. And, you know, it is that, but there is a whole other kind of emotional and psychological kind of process to it, especially if you have money and you're the one that is, you know, kind of bankrolling the project. So I think I wish at the beginning that, let's just say when I started Miranda Mercury, I was just like the writer guy, but by the end of Miranda Mercury, I was paying money out of my own pocket in order to get it finished. And that is not something that I ever imagined was going to be the case. So you just have to be prepared to play whatever role you need to play, you know, to get the job done. And
if you're the starter of the, if you're the person who originates the property, and Brandon is quite right. There's a difference between a work for hire and a partnership. Partnership is what we've all been sort of talking about, 50-50 ownership. If Todd decides he wants to sell, I don't know, t-shirts with just the art, I still get 50% of that. I don't have any whatever. And if I wanted to go write books, just books with no pictures, he would still get 50% of whatever I got paid. But the contracts I write for other things are designs predated your participation in this project. You do not own these characters. You do not share in the copyright of these characters. These are mine. If you step away, some other artist will come in. Theoretically, I could hire another writer, and that writer will get the same contract. You do not own these characters. If that's not acceptable, I understand, and I'll find someone with whom it is acceptable. But that is something I had to learn, right? You have to know the difference between collaboration and hiring someone. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. And even, you know, even when you do that, sometimes, you know, you have a partnership, but sometimes that partnership is unequal in certain ways. And you have to make the decision if if you're willing to do that. Because as Jeff said, you might do the 50-50 split with your artist, but you know that the artist's time is worth more than yours, right? So you may have to make the decision, do I pay my artist up front, even though we own 50-50 of the property, and basically charge them their advance on the back end? So you have to make decisions like that. And you have to decide, even when you have a partnership, you have to, sometimes the partnership has to be slightly unequal in order to get the job done, to get the project out so that it exists. So just be very upfront, be very honest, and, you know, be flexible in certain respects and inflexible in other respects. You know, you want to be, you can't, this is what I'm talking about, like many hats. Like you can't be the coach that's just riding the guys just nonstop.
We only got 4 minutes left, so Ramon, can you...
Cool. All right, so you know, just
I mean, a lot of it is,
I'll let somebody else jump in. Go ahead.
A lot of it is the same thing you guys said, but on the flip side, it's more so on when you're a work for hire, and that's probably to mitigate my excitement for projects. If I could go back in time and tell my younger self that's probably what it would be, because it's very easy to get caught up in, you know, seeing 5 zeros after a check for the first time, or, you know, there's all kinds of different little milestones that hit, and you're like, man, this is so cool, I'm so excited. Or someone says, oh, we want to hire you for this, or we want to get this deal going, but then it turns into something else, or for a myriad of reasons it doesn't go through, you know, the deal falls through. So it would be more to kind of mitigate that excitement, still staying focused on whatever that like ultimate, you know, goal is, but not getting so like, oh, this is it, and, you know, I can, you know, retire in 4 years once this movie is, you know, that kind of stuff. It saves you a lot of headache and heartache, I think, in the long run, if throughout your career you're kind of just more tempered that way.
We got 2 minutes left, roughly. I'm just going to say this real quick. The one thing I would wish someone had kind of imprinted upon me when I first started on my path was you basically have to be made out of, like Mr. Fantastic, like, you know, the elongated man. You got to be made out of jelly a little bit, in the sense that you have to be, as Bruce Lee would say, like
water. Yeah.
You have to be able to adjust on your feet, because there will be things that pop up. I went through 6 different art teams over 8 years to complete my first original project, which was called Shadow Law. And this was in the middle of a period of time when I was further away from being a writer than I ever was in my entire life up to this point, you know? So I had, without a shadow of a doubt, no pun intended, I had to constantly figure out a way to make it happen. And that's the number one thing, that no matter what happens, have that goal in mind and do not let anything, people, family, friends, natural disasters, or a smaller bank account stop you, because you can find a way to make it happen. So in the time we have left, please tell me what you guys are working on, what you got coming up, and how people can find you on social media. We'll start with Jeff, Ramon, Shannon, and Brandon. So let's go.
You can find me on Twitter at Thorne Identity, or Jeff Thorne at Jeff Thorne, either way. I have a bunch of NDA projects that I can't talk about, sadly. Right now, I guess, just go to Amazon, look my name up, Geoffrey Thorne. There's a bunch of books there.
With a G.
With a G. I'd love for you to buy those things. And I have on Webtoons for free this thing called Shadow of the Cat, and this other thing called Sisters. They're just my own thing. You don't have to pay a dime. I got some upcoming stuff, but there's nothing I can hawk right now. So
gotcha.
Go to Amazon, look me up.
Ramon.
Cool. So real quick, the best way to find me online is Instagram. It's at Marogue. It's I think right over here, but Marogue. You can find all my books on Kickstarter right now under my imprint Myth division. The next book, actually, I think at this point is live right now when people are watching this. And it's called Boom Queens. So that's the next title that's coming out on Kickstarter. But you can find all the info on Instagram.
Awesome.
Shannon.
ShannonDenton.com, all the social medias. I'm the dude with my name. And then you can find me and my books. I have over 40 YA novels on the actionopolis.com site, or you can pick them all up on Amazon.
Hey, my website is BrandonThomasWrites.com. I am accessible on Twitter and Instagram, the same handle at BWrites247. That's BWRITES 247. I'm currently writing Excellence for Skybound Image, which is being illustrated by Kari Randolph. My new Aftershock series. Sympathy for No Devils launches in October, and then I have a bunch of unannounced stuff that'll be out next year. So I will be around.
Awesome.
And me, I'm Brandon Easton, at Brandon Easton on Twitter, on Instagram, Brandon Easton Writer. I have a ton of stuff out right now. Judge Dredd, False Witness, Star Trek Year 5 is still coming. Transformers Galaxies is an Ultra Magnus story arc, as well as Netflix has now delayed Transformers War for Cybertron Siege. And I'm wrapping up my run on Marvel Action Spider-Man, which will be out real soon too. And that's about it. So hopefully we'll run into all you folks in 2021 at, at WonderCon and all these other spots. So thank you so much. Again, I'd like to thank Geoffrey Thorne, Ramón Govea, Shannon Denton, and Brandon Thomas. You can also find me and Brandon Thomas on the Two Brandons podcast. And that's our time.
Look at that.
Talk to you guys soon.
All right, guys. It's great seeing you.
All right, take care.
All right, y'all take it easy.